Welcome to the Healers Café, the number one show for medical practitioners and holistic healers to have heart to heart conversations about their day to day lives while sharing their expertise for improving your health and wellness. Welcome to the Healers Café. Today I have with me Michelle Taylor, and she's the founder of the Woman in Wealth Initiative, a transformative platform aimed at empowering women to take control of their financial futures. With over a decade of experience in financial services, Michelle is committed to closing the wealth gap by providing financial education and a supportive community for women from all walks of life, from business owners preparing for exit strategies to stay-at-home moms managing household budgets. Michelle's initiatives help women define and achieve their version of financial success with confidence and clarity. Now, some of you may be wondering, what does this have to do with health and how is it all tied in? So I'm going to, first of all, welcome you, Michelle, and maybe you could do that little tie-in since
Thank you.
this is the podcast we're running and it is very tied. So please go ahead.
It absolutely is. So, thank you. I'm excited to be here with you. And I feel as passionate about what you talk about on this podcast as women and their approach to money. I was unfortunately and fortunately exposed to how important health is at a very young age. I had lived my whole life and never had any issues. And at 17 was very unexpectedly diagnosed with leukemia. So I quickly got a lesson in how important priorities are in life and how critical your health is to every other component in what we're doing.
Yeah. That would do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you think you got that? I'm just going to call it a lesson. There's a million ways, but why is this your path? Why did this in retrospect happen for you?
Wow. Well, so growing up, I was a product of a divorced home. My parents were very amicable, but approached things very differently. And money was something that was always a bit of a stressor for my mother. My dad was an entrepreneur, so his approach was a little bit different. And when I was coming up through my teenage years, I didn't realize necessarily how my mom's struggles and stressors around this could impact the situation. When I got sick, one of the first things the doctor said to me was likely this was caused by stress. And I had had a really rough year. I had gone through losing a grandparent I was close to watching my having some financial struggles with my dad's business and feeling that and absorbing that, and then going through a really hard breakup as a teenager, and I internalized all of that and had a lot of stress. And so I think at that point I realized, okay, if stress can do this to your body, how do I make sure that as I grow up and build a life of my own, that I avoid stress as much as I possibly can? And one of those things was around being financially educated and comfortable with how money does impact that in your life. So I knew that in order for me to make sure that I was avoiding financial stress, I wanted to also impact as many women as I possibly could being in this field to learn how it's manageable and how to tackle it one step at a time to take some of that stress away from them as well.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Yeah, that ties it kind of together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and can you maybe expand upon, because it's not unusual, the situation, but having a one parent that's more of an entrepreneur and one that, so what is her, she was a stay-at-home mom or more of an like an employee prior and then a stay-at-home mom, or what was her financial background and understanding?
So initially, she was a stay-at-home mom. And then when my parents divorced, she went back to work and she went into retail management.
Mhm.
And in that, she was just very budgeted. She was working with a limited income and wanted to ensure that I wasn't missing out. I was, taking dance classes my whole life and doing the little extras as much as she could. And I remember growing up and watching her sit at the dining room table every Sunday balancing her checkbook. And I could see the stress that it brought. And then I could also see the flip side of that with my dad, who was an entrepreneur and approached money very differently. Money was a tool. He knew that if he needed to, he could go out and make more. He felt more in control. He made it a little bit more lighthearted, where my mom, being an employee, she didn't have the same opportunities to go out and truly do something that would have the immediate and direct result of more income coming into the house. So I learned very quickly that being an employee and very budgeted was more stressful. And being an entrepreneur and having the ability to go out and create more opportunity seemed like the natural path to a little bit more of a stress-free life. And, looking at it through that young girl's eyes, I realize now, being an entrepreneur myself, how it's quite the opposite, actually. Being an entrepreneur is very stressful. But I think it just speaks to and leans into the fact that regardless of what you're doing in your life, making sure that stress is limited at all costs is truly the way to build health and wealth and a life of longevity, hopefully.
Mm. Well, it's interesting that statement, a kind of a turnaround there, because a lot of entrepreneurs realize that there's definitely a stressful aspect to it. I mean, part of it, sure, you control your schedule. So yes, you can work 160-hour if you want, you know. You can travel, sure.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, nobody really tells you what to do. I mean, you can have great relationships with your team, but you
Mhm.
don't have to be, that terrible boss and whatever. So yeah, lots of that. But it's like you make it what you want it to be, right?
Mhm.
And so I think part of the lesson, at least that I can see in it, is that you learn to be flexible and innovative and creative, right? And I think you have a more sovereign self approach to living life.
Absolutely. And that's one thing, in that I learned that you can't worry about the things that you can't control. And it
Right?
was a valuable lesson at 17 to realize so much of this life we can't control. It's how we approach it. And that's a hard thing to learn even as an adult.
Of
So
course.
when I talk to people about it, I often say it's one of the best and worst things that ever happened to me, because you quickly learn how to pivot, face a problem head on, focus on a solution, and how important true health really is to the big picture. Health does not discriminate. And there are things that we can do to set ourselves up for success. But again, I feel like that goes back to the money story. Having a freedom of income allows people to pursue health in ways that feel authentic to them. So it always comes back to, how do you set someone up with the proper resources to be able to live their most healthy life, with or without a focus on just the financials. And when I first found out I was sick, one of the things I did learn, but through another family member that was an entrepreneur, was my uncle. We wanted to get a second opinion because it was very early on. And so there were some question marks of what we were really dealing with. And My uncle was very successful entrepreneur, and he had relationships with doctors at Mayo Clinic. And so we had tried to get in, we could not, but my uncle made a few phone calls, and I had an appointment at Mayo Clinic with the best doctors and went right up there. And I was very aware of the fact that that happened because of his connections. And so again, it was another kind of check on the box of, okay, building something where you have impact and are kind of in charge of your own destiny in a way,
Right.
not only gives you opportunity, but opens up doors because of connection. And that's sometimes limited as well when it comes to what you're doing in your life.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point because it's true when you're an employee, you've got your boss and then you've got the whole, infrastructure, the government, the taxes, all that whatever. There are words for it, but I won't use them on my own podcast.
Handcuffs.
Anyway, yes. Um, but when you're an entrepreneur, I mean, sure, you have to deal with some of that, but so much more flexibility. But it's true, it's human connections. It's you happen to meet this person who happens to know this, whether it's in your field or not. It's just because it's much larger and expanse, right? You're growing yourself as a person, right? Which has, in this current system, financial advantages, but it's just advantages of meeting more people, more exposure, more of that, right? So yeah, very interesting. So what was it like being 17 and being told by the medical people that this is a stress related condition? Like where did you go with that?
Yeah, it's wild because at that age, you think that there wouldn't be that much stress. But especially in this day and age, I mean, what we're doing with how we're how the growing up experience has changed even since I was little has placed a ton of stress on parents and kiddos in a way that we've never seen before. And so for me, I remember being really surprised by that and thinking, how do I approach now the rest of my life with as little stress as possible? And one of the things that I focused on is looking at a solution instead of a problem. So there's somebody that I've heard speak many times and gotten the pleasure to work with over the years. His name is Dr. Jason Selk, and he talks a lot about being relentless solution focused. And I felt that I was doing that before I even knew what it was. So, you know, I was also taught that as growing up in a household, we're Christian and believe that if you have a worry, you are supposed to give it to God and let it kind of work itself out. And so I thought, how do I do this? How do I take something that would be stressful and give it away and then focus on what I can control? And I put it into practice then because it was very scary. When you hear a diagnosis like that and you realize that it could have been a direct um, result of something that I did, how do I undo that so something like this never happens again? And a lot of it was internalized. I didn't talk about it with my parents. We didn't have the same access to resources that we do now. So I really did just think, what can I control? Let me focus on that. So as the lead up to the diagnosis was extremely stressful. I was most afraid as a 17-year-old girl of losing my hair. I never thought about the option of I could pass away from it. I always just thought, I'm in my senior year of high school. I'm captain of our cheerleading team. I don't want to lose my hair. Once I knew what the diagnosis was, that's when the people around me, my family and friends, that's when they got very emotional and upset. But for me, it was something strange where I immediately thought, okay, there's nothing that I can worry about that's going to change this. So now let's just get started on treatment because I can put all of my energy and focus on getting through it. so I can get back to being a normal teenager again. And I wish I could tell you how I knew to do that at 17, but I still to this day don't know, but I'm so thankful that I did.
Yeah. And you, like, you didn't go through the blame, like, oh, it's my mom's this, or it's my dad's this, or it's because they're divorcing. You just focus on what can I do, basically.
What can I do to impact this journey moving forward?
Yeah.
Pouring your energy into that instead of playing the should have, could have, would have, I
Yeah.
think was something that I held on to very tightly.
Wow. It's amazing. I mean, just I don't want to take your interview time, but I do want to share a little bit my story because there's some similarities to it. Um,
Sure.
when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was like, okay, I actually I'm going to figure out what to do about it and get myself into a position where I'm not living stressfully. But one of the choices was not to tell anybody because I had realized, and I was older than you, not 17, but at that point I had realized that if I told my parents, if I told, that, like, the people who love me, you know, their love would have come in like, "Oh, did you try this? Do you do this? Oh, don't do that because, oh, how do you know that works?" And I realized, like, no, I need to focus 100% on me and getting through this without other people's care, but which comes often in the form of well-meaning judgment, right? And recommendations that, like, if it's not resonating, it's not going to be right for me, right? So then avoid them, all the pain and all the tragedy, and then I'll see them when I'm on the other side and I'm fine, you know. And that's exactly what happened, right? So yeah, it's interesting.
It's it is, it really is. And I think that, for me, something else that I really grasped onto, and I don't know if this is how you ended up where you're at, is I tell people all the time, I recognize that traditional medicine saved my life at that point, but it actually pushed me in a totally different direction when it came to health and wellness moving forward as an adult.
Mm.
I seek out anything I can that is more natural. I go to a functional medicine doctor. I've been in remission and considered cured now for, 20,
Plus
26
years.
25 years. So I don't go to get those things checked. I don't have to anymore, but I really do just focus on the here and now, listening to my body, understanding that the things I can control, the quality of the food that I eat, what I put into my body, what kind of sleep I'm getting. I wear an Aura ring. I do all of those things because they feel like things I can control versus going to a doctor once a year and them putting me on a prescription and it feels a little bit out of my control. So again, I've kind of held on to the control and recognized if you break your arm, you go to the emergency room. If you have a cough, you don't go get on a Z-Pack. You chew up of garlic or take honey and elderberry or your vitamins. And again, I think it's because I could control and understand that.
What would your life be like if you were pain-free? If you were one of the millions who suffer from chronic pain, the thought of just one day without it may seem impossible. This is often because conventional medicine tends to fall short in the treatment of pain, opting to prescribe pills or recommend surgery rather than getting to the root cause of the problem. But if you are suffering with emotional or physical pain, there is hope. Join the founder and CEO of Bowen College, Manon Bolliger, live online for your body-mind reboot. Learn how to listen to your symptoms and get to the root cause of your pain. Plus, be trained in basic Bowen therapy moves so that you can reboot your body for optimal health. You don't have to live in pain. You can heal. Stop the pain pill cycle by visiting www.yourbodymindreboot.com to learn more and to register.
and that was important.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think we did choose different um, choices at that moment, but I had a much earlier lesson in life where that made it clear that it really was about taking charge, of your health, which also means your environment, but also your emotional environment. So it really is. For me, it was like, okay, this is now the new lesson I'm getting to learn through this one. So it's like, okay, so and it's been also 27 years now that I've been completely clear. And I don't get checked because I don't associate myself to a so-called survivor. It's like, no, no, no. This went through me, served its purpose for me, and I'm ready to learn, new things.
A girl after my own heart. It is something that happened to me. It is not part of what we identify with.
No, exactly.
And
Exactly.
going through this again, tying it back to what the financial impact can be, I'm sure that the choices that you've made, you recognize that really good health and wellness is much more expensive than doing things in the traditional way. And so, I encourage everybody to think through what is most important to you. I talk about health all the time. Uh, and how do you make sure that you're planning and building a life that will allow you to, buy organic food and shop at a farm and know where your food is coming from and, look into things like infrared saunas or all of these things. And it goes back to how do you become the architect of a life that will allow you to focus on the things that are important. And it comes back to financial capability. So
Yeah.
how do we make sure that women all over this country are having the same conversations and access to the same resources, mentorship, material to truly be in a place of power and make the best decisions for themselves and their future?
Yeah. No, and I mean, now we're seeing it big time, all this sort of financial entrapment.
Mhm.
And you see it in the educational system, it's just creating followers that listen, that don't question, that go with some people call it the flow. I call it the prism, but anyway. Um, but how do you get to the mind? Like when you said to yourself, you don't know how you knew. I have the same kind of thing. It was like a knowing and a deep knowing, and then it was a trust, and then I spent years perfecting my intuition, because when it came to money, I would say, oh, I'm so lucky, because let's say I would live in a house and then I would need to move, but it was in the right direction at the right time, and then boom, the asset grew, right? But it's not because I've spent hours and hours and hours and hours on my passion, and on medicine, and on helping people get better. On real estate, I spend no time, but boom, it's like, so I keep saying, oh, I'm so lucky, you know but the thing is, how do you get into the mind that knows, like, in health, I'm so lucky, not because I knew all this knowledge, but because something told me, follow your intuition. And sorry, it's a very long question, but I tend to explain it all out, cushion it with everything so that we can get to the point. But anyway, I'll try and get clear here. But in finances, how do you know, like, this intuition? Because you could say, oh yeah, you could put your money in a bank in a savings account. Well,
Mhm.
today that would be very risky, right? You talk to some people in the banking industry and you tell them, what about silver? And they're like, oh, nothing will ever happen. It's like, uh-huh. It's like not exactly what's happening, you know, or you like people will say, oh, you gamble if I take risks, but they're not risks, it's what do you call it? It's well, it is a risk. Life is a risk. I mean, you
Risk
know,
factor. Mhm.
but that doesn't mean that that you win some and you lose some. It's and how do you get to that place in finance where like you do in health? That's my question.
I think it again is doing your own due diligence, understanding the tools that are part of the game. So finding people that seem to have done what you would like to do and asking questions, having the conversations. And I think that a lot of our intuition and our gut feelings on things really come down to trusting yourself. And it's hard to trust yourself on financial decisions if you don't understand the game that you're playing. And so it starts as simply as knowing what your money is doing for you, knowing what you're spending, what you need to bring in, understanding that it doesn't have to be a big choice. It has to be a choice to move forward. So small intentional steps create a financial snowball that will change your life. And it's very intimidating for somebody who's never understood like the world that you're living in to say, I'm not going to trust what I've been told to trust blindly. I'm
Right,
going to dive in and learn about health and truly understand what's out there. It's the same thing with finances. If you understand that your money needs to grow for you, but you don't understand how the stock market works, that could be very intimidating and really difficult to trust your gut. So I
right.
would say that in finances, just like in health, you've got to start by asking the questions and understanding the game pieces that are on the board. Once you do that, small, right next steps change the outcome of the game.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Step by step.
By step.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the further you go down the ladder, the more and more you learn. It just like with health, what starts out as saying, well, maybe I want to look into different vitamins.
Right.
It turns to, further and further down. And before you know it, you have a podcast talking about true health and how to get there.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Yeah. So I mean you do it step by step, but how do you deal with like what some people there are no mistakes. It's always experiences and opportunities. But when you feel that you made on some level a mistake in the present moment where you're going, "Oh my God, I had a feeling but I didn't pay attention or um I really trusted them because blah blah blah." Usually that's where we go wrong, right? It's usually it involves more than yourself, right?
Mhm.
How have you learned to deal with that?
Just like with health, focus on what you can control. So with money and with health decisions, once the decision is made, oftentimes you can't unwind what's been done, right? You
Right.
can't put toothpaste back in the tube. So when you make a financial decision that doesn't go the way that you hoped it would, or that you feel that you were taken advantage of, I would encourage anybody to not get stuck in the should have, could have, would have. It's now, okay, how do I correct this? How do I course correct? So for example, if someone is listening to advice and they're hearing only focus on paying down any kind of consumer debt. That should be your number one focus. But they aren't building an emergency savings account at the same time. If something happens, they've paid down so much of this debt, but then something unexpected happens and now they have to go back to putting it on a credit card. They may feel like, what was it all for? So the next best step is to figure out how to tweak what you're doing and avoid that the next time. Talk to people, So in that case, I tell everyone live in an and universe. If you have $100, $1,000, $10,000 a month to do something with, don't do everything to one. Pay down your debt and invest and save so that no matter what happens, you have got a lever to pull.
Mhm.
And you can't predict the future. So how do you prepare for the future and not worry about the things that you can't control?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it's very similar, right?
Simple. It seems simple, but
Yeah.
so like if you are somebody, that did a financial, I mean, I'm sorry, a medical procedure or got treatment that afterward you say, oh wow, like I could have done this, right? With the leukemia at 17, it because of that, I had to go through IVF to have my children, which was my number one goal in life, was to be a mom. And it was very easy for me to say in that moment, that decision I made led to this because of the drugs and the poison that it was being in my system. I can't undo it, but I can make better decisions moving forward of learning what side effects are, learning how to treat things holistically that aren't going to affect me in the same way. God forbid anything else happen. Same thing with finances.
Yeah. Yeah.
Learn from the past, self-correct a little bit, and lean on people who have learned the same or similar lessons ahead of you. We all know those people.
Yeah. No, I think it's true. And what about the box that often exists with, and I brought it up as if it was a valid box, but the idea of the employee mentality compared to the entrepreneur mentality. In that so-called box of the employee, um, first of all, is it really a box, or is it just looking at, you meet other people and they're doing it differently, and then you say, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll put some of the funds into this. That's not very employee-like, gosh, maybe I'm not in that mentality fully, or.
Sure. Well, not everybody is meant to be an entrepreneur. So it's not trying to emulate someone in a way that is uncomfortable for you. It's a way of saying, again, taking control of the situation. So if you are an employee and you enjoy being an employee, you don't want to take the risk of being an entrepreneur, but you want to improve what tools you have in your toolbox to live a life that may look a little different. Ask the questions to stay in your comfort zone. But again, we have so many resources available to us. How do I increase my income without becoming a business owner? How do I increase what's coming into my home? Well, maybe it is evaluating what you're spending in areas that don't resonate with you anymore or aren't as important to you. How do you maybe take a little bit less of, or take more of your money home by putting a little bit less in a retirement account that you can't touch until you're 59 and a half and you're 30 and you have this big dream, but you're overfunding or maximizing a retirement account. Maybe that's not in alignment with your goals. So again, it all comes back to resources and conversation and not trying to do something that feels uncomfortable, but getting comfortable understanding the players, understanding what resources you have at your fingertips to go after what's important to you. And I think that on the outside, being an entrepreneur feels a lot more like a freedom, but there's also the consideration of, your business is never turned off. I have phone calls or text messages very late at night or on the weekends, and then I have to make the choice. Is this a fire that I have to address now for my own well-being, or can I wait until Monday? So life is full of these choices, whichever path we're on. So I think it's just important to find the path that feels the best to keep your health and wellness at the forefront and stay focused on always having conversations with people that seem to have learned lessons you may have not learned.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I was going to say, I'll leave the last words to you. Those are perfect. Well, our time is up, but thank you so much for spending the time and having this conversation.
It was my absolute pleasure to be here.
Well, I guess when it comes to finance, money, or health and well-being, probably the biggest lesson, and I think that was very well addressed, is the here and now, work with the things you can control and the things you can't. Don't put them in your stressor zone. What if I could? What if this? What if that? A lot of people spend time in that, which is a stressor. It doesn't matter in what domain you do that in, but it definitely has an impact on your health. So I loved just simply control the things you can, and then obviously it's an attitude thing, and life is happening for you. It's for us to learn, um from we're not presented things that we can't incorporate and learn from if we choose to. And you know, we're not necessarily supposed to be here past the time that we're not. So it's about just relaxing into what is. So, anyways, a very light conversation given the health implications. Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café. If you haven't already done so, please like, comment, and subscribe with notifications on, as I post a new podcast every Wednesday with tons of useful information and tips for natural healing that you won't want to miss.